Precipitation reactions. A precipitation reaction is a double replacement reaction, and precipitation reactions form a precipitate. Now, when you've heard of precipitation before, you probably heard of rain or snow, something falling down from the sky. Well, in a precipitation reaction, a solid will form in the reaction and it will fall to the bottom of the container because it's a solid, which means it will most likely be more dense than the water that everything is dissolved in. These AQs here mean aqueous, which means it's dissolved in water. So if a solid forms in the reaction, then we call it a precipitation reaction. So it will form a solid which will fall down, precipitate, to the bottom of your container. So what you're going to do in these first three, it tells you AQ or S. AQ is aqueous, it means it's dissolved in water. S means it's a solid and it's not going to dissolve in the water. So if you have an S as a product, a solid as a product, then you have a precipitation reaction. The part 2, numbers 4 through 10, are a little bit harder because it doesn't tell you if something is a solid. You have to determine this for yourself. So let me show you in the reading material what this looks like. Here is a solubility chart, and you're going to look up the negative ion for all of your products. So you're going to look up, for example, in this one we have NH4Cl, so I'm going to look up Cl right here, which is chloride, and it says it's soluble with these exceptions. That means that any chloride is soluble except for silver chloride, mercury chloride, and lead chloride. So what you're going to do here, you look back, NH4 is not one of these exceptions, so chloride is soluble, and ammonium chloride is what this one is, so it is soluble. So you can put AQ so that you know, hey, this one's aqueous, it's dissolved in water. Then I look up BaSO4. Here's SO4, sulfate. It is soluble unless it's one of the exceptions. BaSO4 is one of my exceptions, so that means it's not soluble. So that means that BaSO4 is going to be a solid S. So I would label this as a solid since I have an aqueous, one that dissolves, and a solid, one that does not dissolve. Then I have a precipitation reaction. So I can put a Y for yes, it is a precipitation reaction because I know that it did form a solid. Do the same thing for the rest of these. Look up your two products and determine, is it soluble or insoluble. Soluble you'd label with AQ, and insoluble you would label with S. The way to read this again, any of these, nitrate, chloride, and sulfate, are soluble unless it's one of these. Carbonate, hydroxide, and sulfide will all be insoluble, not soluble, so they'll be solids unless they're one of these. Right? Group 1 elements means any of the elements in group 1, hydrogen, lithium, and so on. So these will all be insoluble, they'll form solids unless it formed with one of these positive ions. It gives you some examples for soluble and insoluble down here in case you want to check and make sure that you're doing it right. Check all of your products, make sure you have one aqueous and one solid, and if you do, then you have a precipitation reaction. So finish that up through number 10, and if you do still have any questions, please make sure you ask.